He shared his coat with a freezing stranger at a bus stop, had no idea she was a CEO who. The wind whipped through Chicago like a sharp blade, carrying tiny flecks of snow that danced under the streetlights. It was a cold evening in February 2024, and the city's busy streets were quiet, buried under a soft layer of white. At a lonely bus stop near a flickering neon diner sign, Marcus Johnson stood shivering in his faded gray coat. His hands gripped a worn folder stuffed with 6 job applications, 6 quiet no's that weighed heavier than the snow piling up around his scuffed shoes. Marcus was 48, once a bridge builder, a husband, a dad. Now, he was just a man trying to stay warm. His breath puffed out in little clouds as he glanced at the diner's clock through the frosty air. 7:52 p.m. The bus was late. His toes ached from the cold creeping through his thin boots, and his stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday. From the snowy haze, a figure appeared, a woman, maybe in her late 30s, stepped into the dim glow of the bus stop's shelter. She wore a thin dress and a blazer. No coat, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her shoes clicked on the icy pavement, and her damp hair stuck to her cheeks. She was shaking, her teeth chattering loud enough for Marcus to hear. He tried not to look. Just another night, he told himself, just another bus to nowhere. But the wind howled, and the woman shrank into herself, hugging her arms tighter. Marcus glanced at her again. His coat wasn't much, barely enough to keep him warm, but it was all he had. He could have stayed quiet, could have kept it to himself, but he didn't. Without a word, Marcus shrugged off his coat. The cold hit him like a punch, but he stepped toward her anyway. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide. "You don't have to do that," she said, her voice shaky. Marcus gave a small smile. "I've lost plenty today. Might as well give what's left." She hesitated, glancing at his worn sweater underneath. "But you'll freeze." "Not tonight," he said softly. He draped the coat over her shoulders, stepping back as she pulled it close. It smelled faintly of soap and maybe a hint of the coffee he'd spilled on it last week. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Marcus nodded, crossing his arms to trap what little warmth he had left. They stood there, quiet, as snow fell in soft, heavy flakes. After a moment, she turned to him. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he said. "You?" "Elise." "Nice to meet you, Elise." She looked at him again, tugging the coat tighter. "You really didn't have to give me your coat." He shrugged. "Couldn't just let you turn into an icicle." The low growl of a bus engine broke the silence, its headlights slicing through the snow. Elise stepped toward it, then paused, looking back at him. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked. Marcus gave a vague wave. "Somewhere." He didn't say that. Somewhere was an old van parked in an empty lot near the river. Elise reached into her bag, pulled out a small card, and pressed it into his hand. "If you ever need anything," she said. Marcus took it without looking, slipping it into his folder with his applications. People said things like that all the time. They didn't always mean it. Elise climbed onto the bus, glancing back one last time before the doors hissed shut. Marcus stood there, snow settling on his shoulders, trembling not just from the cold but from something deeper, something small and warm. Like a candle flickering in the dark. He looked up at the stormy sky, then down the empty street. "Maybe tomorrow," he murmured, turning to trudge through the snow. The side streets were hushed, the city's noise muffled by the storm. Snow crunched under Marcus's boots as he made his way to his van. A beat-up 2001 Dodge parked behind a crumbling factory. It wasn't much, a cracked windshield, a heater that hadn't worked in years, and a backseat piled with blankets and a flat pillow. Marcus climbed inside, shutting the door against the cold. From the glove box, he pulled out a small metal box. Inside was a faded photo, his wife, Sarah, smiling wide, and their daughter, Mia, about 8, with a gap-toothed grin. "Good night, Sarah," Marcus whispered. "Good night, Mia." He leaned back, staring at the van's sagging ceiling, letting memories wash over him. Once, Marcus had been a man who built things, bridges, roads, dreams. He and Sarah had a little house. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs. She worked at a daycare. always humming songs that made Mia giggle. They weren't rich, but they were happy. Then came the accident. A drunk driver. A rainy night. And Sarah was gone in an instant. Marcus tried to hold it together for Mia. But grief was heavy. And bills piled up faster than he could pay them. The house was sold. Their life shrinking to apartments. Then motels. And finally this van. He'd turned the backseat into a castle for Mia. Made canned beans into pirate treasure. And told her the stars above the parking lot were their own private sky. Every morning, he'd walk her to school. His shirt ironed with a borrowed iron. His face shaved clean. "Why do you still shave?" a friend at the shelter once asked. Marcus had smiled. "Because my daughter needs to know things will get better. And I need to look like I believe it." He took odd jobs, fixing fences, cleaning gutters, hauling scrap. It wasn't enough, but it kept them afloat. Until last summer, when a social worker came. Mia needed a real home. They said, not a van. Marcus didn't argue. He knew they were right. Through tears, he hugged Mia tight and promised, "Just for now, I'll come get you soon." Since then, every day was a fight, sending out applications, waiting at job fairs, studying building codes at the library, piecing together a plan. Tonight, that plan felt farther away than ever. Marcus rubbed his hands for warmth, thinking about Elise at the bus stop. How cold she'd looked. How surprised she'd been when he gave her his coat. He wasn't sure why he'd done it. Maybe because she reminded him of Sarah. Maybe because he needed to feel like he was still a man who could give something. Anything. Outside, the snow kept falling. Marcus pulled a blanket over himself, leaned against the icy window, and closed his eyes. He didn't have much, but he had himself. For tonight, that was enough. Elise Carter sat in her warm apartment high above Chicago's glowing skyline. Still wrapped in Marcus's gray coat. It smelled faintly of soap and something comforting, like a memory she couldn't place. In the pocket, she'd found a folded piece of paper, a child's drawing. Bright with crayon, two stick figures stood side by side, a heart between them, and the words, "I love you, Daddy," scrawled below. Elise traced the wobbly lines, her throat tight. She couldn't stop picturing Marcus standing in the snow, shivering in just a sweater. His tired smile kind despite everything. He had nothing, yet he'd given her his coat without a second thought. It wasn't just the coat, it was the way he'd looked at her. Like she was worth helping. Even though he didn't know her name, Elise knew she had to find him. The next morning, Elise sat at her desk in a sleek office at Horizon Solutions. The city sprawling below her through tall windows. She picked up a small brass bell and gave it a gentle ring. Her assistant, Jamie, appeared in the doorway. "Yes, Ms. Carter?" "I need help finding someone," Elise said, her voice steady but serious. Jamie raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Who?" "His name's Marcus. I don't know his last name. He was at the bus stop on Clark Street near the diner. Around 8 p.m. last night. He gave me his coat." Jamie's face softened. "I'll see what I can do." "And Jamie," Elise added, her tone firm, "keep this between us." Jamie smiled. "Got it." By noon, Jamie had tapped into Horizon's quiet but powerful network. They pulled footage from street cameras, checked bus schedules, and dug through public records. Days passed, and Elise went through her meetings and emails. But her thoughts kept drifting to the coat folded in her closet and the man who'd given it away so easily. Finally, Jamie returned with a slim file. "His name's Marcus Johnson," she said, setting it on Elise's desk. "Used to be a bridge builder. No steady job now. No address." Elise opened the file. A blurry photo showed a man in a thin sweater, hunched against the cold. An old work ID listed him as a structural engineer. No arrests. No drama. Just a life that had quietly slipped away. Elise's chest ached. "Where is he now?" "One of our contacts saw him near the riverfront," Jamie said. "There's an old van in a lot by some warehouses. Looks like he's living there." Elise closed the file. The office felt too bright. Too perfect. She stood. "I want to go there." Jamie hesitated. "Are you sure? We could have someone bring him here." "No," Elise said, shaking her head. "This isn't business. It's personal." An hour later, Elise sat in the back of a black car as it rolled through Chicago's rougher edges. Boarded-up shops and graffiti-streaked walls passed by. So different from her world of glass towers. The car stopped near a sagging warehouse. Snow piled high around rusted gates. Tucked in the shadows was a battered Dodge van, half buried in snow. Elise stepped out, the cold biting her skin. Her shoes sank into the icy gravel as she walked toward the van. Through the foggy windshield, she saw a figure curled up inside. As she got closer, the door creaked open, and Marcus stumbled out, blinking in the daylight. His clothes were rumpled, his boots caked with snow. He looked worn, thinner than she remembered. At first, he frowned, confused. Then his eyes widened with recognition. And his face shifted, surprise. Then something heavier, like embarrassment. Elise? His voice was rough, like he'd just woken up. "Hi, Marcus," she said, offering a small smile. He glanced at his wrinkled sweater. The old van behind him. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," she said simply. "Why?" His arms crossed, defensive. Elise paused, searching for the right words. "Because you gave me your coat when you had nothing. Because I can't stop thinking about someone who'd do that. Because of what you did," she said finally. "Because I needed to know who gives away the only thing keeping them warm." Marcus gave a dry laugh, looking away. "You didn't need to come all this way. A thank you note would have been fine." "It's not about saying thanks," Elise said softly. "It's about not letting someone like you disappear." They stood there, snow swirling between them, two strangers from different worlds tied together by one small act. Marcus sighed, his breath a puff of mist. "You really came out here just for that?" Elise nodded, "And maybe for something more." Marcus didn't speak, but his eyes softened, like a spark of hope he'd buried long ago. Elise smiled gently. This wasn't the end, it was a beginning. Marcus sat in the passenger seat of Elise's car, his hands fidgeting as Chicago's streets blurred past. He hadn't wanted to go with her, every part of him screamed to stay in the van, where things were familiar, even if they were hard. But Elise's voice, calm and stubborn, had pulled him along. They didn't talk much during the drive. Marcus glanced at her when he thought she wasn't looking. Her face focused on the road. The car pulled into a parking garage beneath a tall glass building, Horizon Solutions. Marcus's stomach twisted. Inside, the lobby was all shiny floors and sharp suits. People moving like they had somewhere important to be. Marcus felt every stain on his sweater, every scuff on his boots. "This way," Elise said, leading him to an elevator. The ride up was quiet, the hum of the motor loud in his ears. They stepped into a hallway lined with glass rooms and stopped at a small one at the end. Elise closed the door behind them. "Sit," she said, pointing to a chair across a polished table. Marcus hesitated, then sat, his back stiff. "What's this about?" Elise sat across from him, setting a thin folder on the table. "It's not about the coat," she said. "I told you that." Marcus gave a short laugh. "Dry and tired. Then what, charity?" "No," Elise said firmly. "It's about a chance, for both of us." He eyed the folder but didn't touch it. "What kind of chance?" "I made a new job," Elise said, "one I think you're perfect for." Marcus snorted. "Lady, I'm not exactly office material. I live in a van." "It's not that kind of job," Elise said. "I don't need another suit with a fancy degree. I need someone who gets people, someone who knows what it's like to be invisible. To keep giving when there's nothing left." Marcus shook his head. "I'm nobody special." "You built bridges," Elise said, leaning forward. "You made things that connected people. That's what I need, someone to help us remember why we do this. Not with numbers, but with heart." Marcus's throat tightened. He looked at his rough hands, scarred from years of work. "I haven't built anything in a long time." "You gave me your coat," Elise said softly. "That says more about you than any job application ever could." He rubbed his face, the words sinking in. It felt too big, too good to be true. What would I even do? Elise slid the folder closer. "You'd be an advisor, help teams, shape projects, remind us to care, not with charts, but with who you are." Marcus stared at the folder, his hands still. "I don't know." "You don't have to decide now." Elise said, standing. She handed him a business card. Think about it. Call me if you want to talk. Marcus took the card, holding it like it might break. Elise smiled, warm and real. You're needed, Marcus, more than you know. She turned and left, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He stayed in the room for a long time, the folder untouched. Outside the window, Chicago's lights sparkled in the snowy dusk. Part of him wanted to run back to his van, back to the cold he knew. But another part, a small, stubborn part, wanted to believe. The choice felt heavier than anything he'd ever carried. Hours later, Marcus sat in his van, the folder on the seat beside him. He hadn't opened it yet. The city glowed through the cracked windshield, snow falling softly outside. He thought of Sarah, of Mia, of the man he used to be. And for the first time in a long time, he thought of the man he might still become.